Okay, and then I think...
I'm just going to remove myself.
Okay, great.
When I figure out how to do that.
Sure.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, and then I think...
I'm just going to remove myself.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Just going to grab a glass of water real quick. We've got 2 minutes or a minute until... Okay. All right. I think, Jesse, I think your audio is on. Okay. I think, Jesse, I think your audio is on. I think, Jesse, I think your audio is on. Jesse, I think... Okay. All right. Great. Well, I think we're all set up. Is it getting better? I think it's resolved, right? The sound thing. I'm gonna wait for somebody to confirm. Is it getting better? I think it's resolved, right? The sound thing. I'm gonna wait for somebody to confirm. I don't know what's going on. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna leave and try coming back. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna leave and try coming back. Okay. Yay. All right. How does this sound? Is this better? Thank you, Jesse. No worries. Thank you. Great. Okay. Well, I think we're good. Nothing like a little bardo of technology pain. Um, so, welcome to Mahamudra for the People. I was thinking maybe we could just begin with a little practice, and we'll do this for maybe about 20 minutes, just to kind of settle in. So allow your body to settle into a comfortable meditation position, and allow yourself to come back into relationship with the breath. And whatever it is that you use as an anchor or support, whether it's a visualized object or an object in front of you, or the experience of phenomena or the mind that arises as the anchor for your practice. Slowly, just bring yourself back to this virtual meeting. And I want to see if, in this particular space, having just gone through a portion of meditation, if there's anything that's coming up, anything that anybody wants to ask, especially in relationship to that practice session. Anything? Okay. All right. I also wanted to see if there were any kind of outstanding questions on the third Karmapa's prayer, Mahamudra aspiration prayer. Maybe, oh, there's a question. Let's see. This came up for me and I'm wondering if you'd offer thoughts on it. Doing is doom, ruminating is ruin. Rest in your own way and be self-liberated. Well, that's a profound thing that came up. So, yeah, I mean, within the context of this meditation, the instruction "doing is doom" is kind of directs. I'm sorry, I'm tired. Directly relates to Tilopa's 6 nails in the sense that we're not trying to do anything in particular with our practice. That's kind of meant to be lightly held, that statement. We are trying to let the mind rest freely and to rest into the experience of awareness, which is Rigpa, right? Which is the way that the mind knows. It's that quality of knowing. So sometimes when we apply too much effort into resting into the awareness of any given time or whatever's arising, then we lose that, right? The shift goes from very naturally held gentle awareness to some kind of more artificial experience, And so ruminating is ruin. It kind of relates back to this kind of analytical kind of meditation where we're kind of chasing after what may be happening. And so the rumination or the analysis on one level, especially within the practice of Vipassana or Lakung, is kind of, again, lightly held, but this kind of process of really trying to, determine what I'm doing right now pulls us out of relationship with being directly present in the moment. Rest in your own way and be self-liberated. The self-liberation piece in this respect is, thought occurrence will happen, right? The mind at times is active, and at other times it's still. And whether or not it's active or not really isn't a big deal. What is the bigger deal is if we are caught within this kind of binary good-bad judgment of whatever's happening. The present moment becomes naturally liberated when we're able to ease into an experience that is free of that kind of dualistic analysis. Right? So, for example, like an emotion can arise, and perhaps imagine that earlier in the day, maybe you've had a difficult interaction with somebody who may be historically very difficult for you, or your relationship with that person is a relationship that, for some reason sometimes tends towards confrontation or conflict. While resting in meditation, it's very natural sometimes for some of these kind of almost like emotional memories to come up. And when they do, if we're able to just let them arise naturally without any judgment, right, without any kind of analysis as to whether or not the arisal itself is good or bad, or then whatever is arising has a particular characteristic of either being wanted or not being wanted in the moment. If we can rest free of that, then everything becomes essentially self-liberated in the sense that it's able to arise without any of this kind of, neurotic, critical analysis. Resting in our own way, the own way part of it also has to do with the fact that we need to figure out how to do this. Just because an instruction is given doesn't mean it's the kind of thing that we have to practice exactly in that manner. All of us are different, our experiences are different, our klesha patterns are different. And so this point in resting in your own way is also an acknowledgement of the fact that all of these instructions are guidelines that hit very closely to the mark. And yet the thing that will allow it to hit the mark for you is you putting it into practice so that you can then attain the experience. So Jamandria writes, what methods of watching rather than responding to emotions that arise as you enter into meditation? What are methods of watching rather than responding to emotions that arise as you enter into meditation so that you rest in the open space of mind rather than in rumination, which can be mistaken for space when the emotion itself is vast enough? That's a good point. So now I think here, what I find particularly helpful is the process of just letting go. I think the fire truck's about to go by, so it might be loud. Just letting go, like letting go of the sound of that fire truck. Okay. The emotions themselves can be vast. They can be experienced as vast and sometimes very powerful and at times overpowering. But I think that the important thing to remember is that we ought to kind of come back through repeated practice to this experience of recognizing that the container itself, right, which is not only the nature of mind but awareness, is so vast, right? So actually, maybe we could do a little kind of experiment and see how this works. So let's not delete this. Oh, there it goes. I was gonna say let's not delete this question, but it's fine because so Jamandria, feel free to kind of. Oh, there it goes. Now it's back. So let's hold on to this question and let's all kind of try and do this one thing. And this is kind of amazing. I keep looking out the window because there's a tropical storm that's come to Brooklyn, and it's like a sheet of water everywhere. It's kind of exciting. So anyway, in the midst of my own excitement related to the tropical storm, we're going to try and do this. So sit Again, naturally in whatever posture feels comfortable to you, and bring yourself into a meditative experience. Allow yourself to reconnect with your breath and the experience of whatever is arising. And in this moment, try and allow yourself to become aware of all the sounds that may be arising in the room or the space where you are right now. See if you can let yourself understand that this experience of sound awareness is one aspect of the awareness of mind. And from this place, try and allow yourself to merge your experience of awareness with space. So that awareness of mind is awareness of the vastness of mind. Rest in the awareness of space. And as you rest in the awareness of space, feel out from this knowingness to see if there's an edge or a boundary that exists for your mind. Or a boundary that exists in relationship to awareness. Does awareness just stop? How large is the experience of mind? Rest in the awareness of space. Rest in the vastness of mind. So just take a moment to notice, what that experience was like. When we're able to have a greater relationship to the container itself, right, which is awareness. So the container itself, the canvas upon which everything is painted. It's so much. It's so expansive, and it includes so much more than whatever emotion may be arising. Right? And when we kind of practice in this way, kind of letting go of experiencing what is happening right now, but understanding that the container is not very small. That the emotion may kind of feel like it fits in perfectly and consumes all of the space, but the fact is mind is as vast as space. And when we're able to come back to that, whatever arises is able to arise in a way that's unimpeded. Right? It's it's live and direct. It's something that cannot be held. So, so this is the way that we're able to begin to kind of, understand and appreciate not only the spaciousness and the vastness of mind, but also our relationship to everything that arises in relation, in the moment. So, emotion, thought, activity, speediness of mind, and again, when we're able to kind of have an experience of that spaciousness, the gravity of that which creates so much suffering, basically kind of like our emotional reactivity to whatever is happening, and it's not just in our mind, right? It's the stuff that happens in relationship to the way phenomena around us unfolds, right? So through all of our sense faculties, we can, through all of our sense faculties, we interact with everything that's happening in space and in time. And when everything feels constricted, right, it's kind of like we're jamming all of this information, all this data of experience into this little hole, and it's completely overwhelming. Right? But the reality is that even though it doesn't feel that way all the time, there is no hole there, because the mind itself is as vast as limitless space. Right? And awareness is basically shares that same nature. One can do a similar kind of meditation that focuses on the inquiry around the purity of mind, because sometimes we react to the thoughts that the thoughts that arise can be really intense, right? And they can lead us to wonder, like, is this experience good? What does this say about the root of my mind? Right? So just as the mind is expansive and vast, it's also inherently pure and self-liberated. It's self-liberated because there's really nothing, to judge it. It's beyond judgment. And yet we kind of, constantly inflict a kind of dualistic patterning onto the experience of mind. We inflict a dualistic patterning onto how we even conceive of mind. So let me, I'm going to come back first to the questions, and then to everything on the sidebar. So Sam writes, everything I've been chewing over, which maybe is related. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, maybe this related question. Sorry, this is Jersey's question. Maybe this is a related question. When I notice that I'm caught up in thoughts or emotions, I try to return to the anchor of my embodiment, mainly breath, but generally whatever my body is perceiving at the time. But I feel like I'm often focusing on the perceptions rather than actually resting in mind or space, whatever that is. Is that an experience of my mind, or is it just its content, what it's perceiving at that moment? So, I think a really good way to look at this is in terms of like gels that you find, with lighting, so like I did theater tech once in college. And so, you have to put all these gels on, and that determines the color of the light that's projected onto the screen. And again, thought activity, right, arises. And the thought activity in and of itself is self-liberated, right? It's just happening. It's not good or bad, right? That is a projection that's put onto it by, by us. Now, the preponderance or the volume of thought activity can appear to make the mind, on a whole, appear to be, for example, a mind of aggression, or a mind of peace, or a mind of generosity, right? Just by the nature of all the thoughts that are rising. But in the mind itself, and as we find in in a lot of texts on Mahamudra, is viewed as essentially pure. It's as if it's a mirror, and everything that arises is reflected in that mirror. But what is arising in that mirror isn't the mind, if that makes sense. So what we're encountering when we're encountering thoughts arising, or our experience with phenomena, like if it's olfactory or auditory or whatever, is just that unfolding of experience. That's not necessarily mind itself, right? And yet, especially in kind of the initial stages of the practice of Mahamudra, focusing our awareness on sound, for example, or on the sense of smell, or on thoughts that are rising in the mind, are all valid ways of practicing, especially shamatha. So when you're focusing on the perceptions are kind of what are dancing in the mirror or on the mirror, right? But they're not the mirror itself. And so the practice of Mahamudra is this practice of kind of coming back to defining and achieving certainty for ourselves as to what the nature of mind actually is. And so when we initially start meditation, there's absolutely zero difference between our idea of what our mind is and everything that's happening, right? This barrage of thought activity, past, present, future, and then there's all the judgment. Oh my God, is this meditation? My mind is like a mess. Like I can't take this, kind of stuff. And with time and with experience, slowly that stuff kind of, begins to be parsed out, because we're able to not react to all of the thought activity that's happening, because we understand it. We gain a sense of, wisdom in relationship to the way everything arises for us. And then as we're able to, allow things to just happen without the judgment and without the activity, and with a relaxed discipline to our practice, eventually the experience almost becomes kind of stretched out a bit. But also because we've begun to understand that mind is not just this small experience. So hopefully that helps, Jersey. I want to get to this comment from Jamandri on the side. Choice is as much a container that there is something to move between. Yes, yeah. I mean, that's a really good observation. Thank you for that. And the thing is, activity without judgment is so hard, and that's a really, and that's the thing, like they say that this practice is so easy because it is, like, in the sense of like all you need to do is just let go of everything. But then the thing that's hard is to let go of our judgment, right? Like, and so that's like, I think a really good kind of emotion to kind of learn to forgive ourselves with, especially as it arises in the form of judgment, is a greed or desire, right? We might find ourselves desirous, not necessarily of an object, but perhaps of a situation or of an outcome. Perhaps it's an outcome that somebody else has had, or perhaps it's an outcome that we desire. Oh, I really want this thing, and it's just not happening. I'm doing everything to make this happen, and it's still not happening. And we find ourselves like, just wrapped up in kind of in a mechanism of, circulating around this desire. And sometimes we'll go the extra distance to just begin to judge ourselves. Oh my God, look at what all this says about me, and just letting go of this is really a key practice. Letting go, and also understanding by the process of letting go, we learn how to be kind and generous towards ourselves. I was telling somebody earlier in the week that there's a meditation text on Mahamudra by this great meditation teacher, Dr. Tashi Namgyal, translated sometimes as Moonbeams of Mahamudra. And there's a very long kind of, translation of it. And in it, there are all these practices one can do as kind of enhancement practices where, for example, one would have, rest in meditation, then have a friend, especially somebody whose opinion we value, come up to us and just yell insults at us, like, oh, you're too proud, or oh, you're pompous, or oh, you're full of yourself, or you're worthless, or all of this stuff, and one is just to rest in the nature of the experience of that moment, and to get a taste of how naturally reactive our response can be, right? And this ends up becoming a form of training in which we just begin to practice, sound, basically kind of, sound hitting our ear and just going, and letting everything that arises arise without, and observing, experiencing, and letting it go, and this kind of gets a little bit to, Jersey's point. Like, I noticed myself really enjoying particular thoughts a lot. And I mean, that's the thing, is like, after a while, once we begin to understand how like amazing our mind is, because just everything just comes and goes and, is born and dies, like all just these thoughts, we can also learn to not take everything that arises so seriously. Right? And so if a moment of intense jealousy arises, like, we can experience it and even just laugh and be like, what a fucking ridiculous thing, you know? This is what it is. This is sometimes saying, when they talk about it as the play of phenomenon, it is literally a play, either like a fine arts play or like, a childish play of like just playing, thoughts arise, just naturally. Right? And they don't have so much valence or volume or gravity until we get clingy or experience intense aversion. So once we begin to, and this is what makes the three poisons very tricky, attachment, aversion, and ignorance, is that, ignorance is this kind of like, dullness, not understanding, like when our awareness becomes dull, and then it's like, we're basically, our meditation session is just like watching TV, we're like wrapped up in the, oh, wow, like, pass popcorn, like this part is getting really dramatic, but we're self-identifying with everything. The attachment is like, wow, like, these are really great thoughts. Like, I think I'm getting enlightened. And then the, process of aversion is, I can't believe I'm having these thoughts. I can't believe this is arising. So, when Mahamudra practice is kind of like, quote unquote, clicking, right? We're able to kind of, quote unquote, and I don't like using this term, but I'm using it anyway, hack, our relationship to the three poisons. There's nowhere for them to stick. It's like having Teflon practice. Yeah, these are great comments. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so Sam's question, something I've been chewing over, which maybe is related to both above questions, is the two metaphors we use: mind like sky, across which thoughts move like clouds, and mind like an ocean, of which thoughts are waves, or arise as an expression. I'm able to experience my mind as an arena through which phenomena pass. But if I try to see how those phenomena are my mind, that's a whole different thing. Not convinced this makes sense. Hopefully it just makes sense to somebody. So the thoughts are mind in the sense that they are arising, right, naturally within the experience of mind, right? But if you experience a thought or a feeling, like, let's say, we'll take a feeling or klesha, like jealousy, right? Mind is not jealousy. If we experience love and then we experience hate in the next moment, right? Mind is neither just love or mind is neither just hate. The experience, like mind itself, is essenceless, right? It's as if, when they say it's clear, when somebody made reference to clear light, the aspect of it that's clear is that nothing that arises taints or colors or stains mind itself. And even though I say this, like, we all need to kind of have this be born out of our own practice. This is the part of the practice that's hard, is kind of coming back to, when this practice is happening, when thought arises, is thought my mind? Is my mind separate from the thoughts? And resting into these kind of, points of inquiry allow us to really kind of get to this, like, tough nut, which is, that it is, since it's free of duality and free of extremes and free of, conceptual elaboration, it's neither of those things. And that makes it hard to express. So Jamandria writes, the similarity to adaptations to trauma/disassociation exists with meditative practices and even some ideological structures within Buddhism gets into a real subtle terrain and discernment issues of practicing, and even in finding mind is space, really. Yes, yeah, that's a really good point. Now, Mahamudra, the practice of Mahamudra is not disassociative, because what it is really is the practice of being in direct relationship with everything that's arising, right? It feels disassociative, I believe, because there's no judgment involved, right? Like everything that arises within the experience of Mahamudra is, from the perspective of the practice itself, one is trying to engage directly, freshly, and freely, without judgment, without analysis, without this binary kind of relationship. Now, when the practice becomes disassociative, when we fall completely out of relationship with everything into this kind of formless experience, which tends to also lack the knowing quality of awareness. Does that make sense? So it's in this sense, Mahamudra is not disassociative, and I think that yes, trauma, can the awareness of trauma or the memory of trauma or the embodiment of trauma can arise within meditation practice the same way it can rise in any particular situation where someone becomes re-triggered to either, I guess primarily vicarious trauma. And yet one still also has the ability to contextualize what's arising within this kind of through the lens of Mahamudra. And it's not that it cures the trauma, like, I'm not saying that, but it does allow us to begin to play with some of the quote unquote reality of everything that is being experienced. So, and that's not meant to be a solution to trauma, but it is a helpful kind of reduction of the intensity of the gravity of whatever is arising, in meditation. And Anjana writes, I have trouble visualizing the city or the actual structures when feeling out the limits of my awareness. Are there other ways to observe the limits of one's awareness? Yeah, so I mean, it could be literal in terms of like stretching out like across our neighborhood, or it could be, in terms of space in the solar system, so to speak. Like, how, like, especially when with these questions about, mind and the limit around mind, or the limit around awareness, right? Does mind, does the experience of mind end like in the stratosphere? Or does it extend outwards? Is mind limited by time, right? So or awareness, can these experiences extend backwards? And can they extend forwards? Or are they only located in the present moment? Um, is there any difference between mind and space, or awareness and space? And again, the thing about these practices is like, it's not that it, the answer is 5 miles, or 3 miles, or 2 miles, or kilometers. The answer is determined by our practice. This is something that we need to be able to understand for ourselves. Um, so pain rates, the mirror isn't harmed by what arises in it. That's right. So if, I mean, this is not to sound too classical, but like if you put a mask on and look in the mirror, like, is that image really you? And so it's very similar. Like, the thoughts that arise are happening, the emotions. So like, another example is like a nightmare. Like we might experience a nightmare. The nightmare isn't us. The nightmare isn't this experience, even though in the experience of dream we might have a nightmare or a scary dream. So and then Tony writes, that's a good point. A way to help guide one's way through this messy web. Consistent awareness helps ground me as practitioner and guide me away from disassociation towards wisdom. Yes, towards wisdom. I think, I think there's a very healthy skepticism, because I also think that in some very traditional Dharma communities, they treat Dharma as like the all perfect medicine for all things, which, it's not. I mean, nothing is necessarily the all perfect wisdom for all things. I think when skillfully practiced, the Dharma can be very healing, right? But I'm not even interested. Like, I'm not interested in like, big claims, and nor am I interested in, propagating an idea of a tradition being a particular kind of way either. This only makes sense, and it only works for the person for whom it works, and that's something we that's helpful to kind of come back to. It's like, so I'm fascinated. I'm just going to name this fascination within myself. I'm fascinated around how the conversation, not here and not with this group of people, but just in general, when we talk about meditation practice and dualism and learning to kind of free ourselves from this kind of dualistic cage that we put ourselves in, and we put everyone else in, and we put the world in, and we put the universe in, we put in an inner universe and external universe, that there can be a lot of fear around what this means in relationship to our relationship with others, and of course ethics, that makes sense, and trauma, and I think that it's helpful to understand that the practice of Mahamudra is a way of seeing and relating to the world around us. It doesn't remove the paradox from our lives. In fact, it kind of only opens us up to the preponderance of paradox. We have the opportunity to kind of rest into making a home in just letting go of paradox and just letting it be, because typically trying to contain and solve. It's like a Rubik's Cube that can just never be solved paradox. Our relationship to good and bad is always going to lead us to this Rubik's Cube, that experience that's just never going to be solved, because it can't be. You know, when everything is defined by, you know, within a binary system, things have to either be one or the other. And the reality is that things are generally neither, you know? And the one or the other, the binariness, and I think this extends to most things, is just pure limitation, you know? And so it helps us to kind of, you know, try to liberate the mind into a non-binary space where we can hold whatever is arising without judgment, right? Without anxiety, without fear. And this is actually healing, because if we've gone through experiences where, you know, we don't even have to be in a physical abusive relationship, but we can be in an emotionally abusive relationship, and there are many kinds of those, right? It's not just, you know, in intimate relationships, but it's also, you know, in the workplace or socially, right? We find ourselves kind of coming back to being traumatized and re-traumatized and triggered by these experiences that are abusive emotionally. Being able to, you know, rest into just pure being without this kind of, you know, habituated relationship to good and bad allows us to ease into just being ourselves, right? And finding not only the wisdom within that experience, right, but also the beauty and the power and the energy and kind of the naturally arising qualities that are, you know, unique to this particular experience, you know, especially this time around. So the Mahamudra practice can be very healing in the sense that it affords us the opportunity to just get free of all of this wasted energy in trying to, you know, run around and determine good or bad, good or bad, good or bad, right or wrong, you know, just, unjust. And it doesn't mean that we throw our ethics out the window, and it doesn't mean that, you know, we just tell everyone to meditate and, you know, you'll be healed. But you know, there's some kind of, you know, there's a kernel of wisdom and a kernel of liberation within the practice. It's not going to heal our bones. It might not heal our trauma, but I think it lessens some of the obsessive qualities or obsessive kind of reification of good and bad, which I think does have an impact on how we relate to difficult experiences we've gone through. So anyway, that was my thought about that thing. And so Payne says, you know, yes, mind is pure, but I still have neuropathy. Mind is pure. Yes, I mean, you know, the mind is pure, and all sorts of crazy stuff arises, and the crazy thoughts and crazy things can arise. The question is, you know, these practices afford us the opportunity as to whether or not we want to go down the rabbit hole of reacting. You know, so like when I used to lead meditation for people in custody at Rikers Island, and the person who I connected with, who began to kind of put me in these different housing areas, was this. At the time, she was an assistant commissioner, and she, you know, she wanted to kind of somehow create the means for people in custody to explore their anger. And so she put me in these housing areas with very violent, you know, repeat offenders. And in order to kind of get into these housing areas, one had to have either slashed or stabbed somebody, in our facilities. They weren't our facilities because I wasn't working for the department. But I spent a lot of time with, these people, some of which were young and some, were older, having been in state prison and then, released and then reoffended. And we spent time focusing on allowing whatever was happening in the moment, right? But we would focus a little bit on, the primary focus was on anger and aggression, and kind of letting those thoughts and emotions kind of arise, right? Rise up, rise up, rise up. And then recognize the entire somatic kind of response that happens with anger and aggression. And so it can be, clenched fists. You might notice that your heart starts to pound. You might notice getting flush. You might notice this kind of like, different feeling in your belly, or you might recognize, this confusion. Just you kind of forget about things. I met one guy who would just kind of fly into a rage, and when he did, he would completely disassociate from the moment. And when he would kind of come to, he'd have blood on his fists from beating people. And so we began exploring through, basic awareness practice, the recognition of these different things as they arise in the moment, and then trying to just let that happen, right? Let that thing arise, and then notice the space that exists between reacting and not reacting. And that was the interesting thing that we were trying to work with was, how to completely acknowledge that I'm fucking on fire and I'm gonna like beat the shit out of somebody. The first person I see, I'm just gonna fucking tear apart, right? And to just rest and sit in that experience with the knowledge and the basically the awareness of the fact that I can choose not to react. And so like, one of these housing areas was so new and experimental, and it was mixed gang, and it was just really intense. And so what would happen invariably, I was never there when it happened, was that fights would break out, and sometimes it was fights between the people in custody and the uniform staff. Sometimes uniform staff may have intimidated them, and they'd just get triggered and they'd start a fight. But it got to a point at one point where these conflicts in several cases would almost start, and then some of the guys that had been involved in this meditation practice didn't react in the way that they would have previously, because they begin to understand the way their mind worked, whereas previously there was no that time between emotion and external action was just like seconds, and they couldn't catch it, and they'd already be in the activity of getting into a fight or responding to their aggression. And with some practice, and some time, some of the folks were able to not, they would be able to see like, holy shit, like I actually have space in this experience, and in this experience of space, I cannot react. Or I could just be like, fuck it, man, it's that kind of day, we're going, and just go right into it. And so that for me was, really highlighted the power of this practice, because there are certain emotions that are very hard to kind of walk back from. And we're all different, and kind of our kind of klesha combinations are different, but anger is such a magnetizing emotion that if many of these people could do this and have the intended outcome for them, which was like, I don't need to be in here and like keep getting into this cycle of just, getting into fights and then receiving discipline as a result of that, which impacts, the length of my stay here, et cetera. It should be inspiring for all of us that, the basic awareness of whatever is arising and the acknowledgement that there is always this option of chasing or not chasing, and then seeing where our practice can go when we practice a little bit more deeply is really powerful. I just want to get to Tony's point. Like I appreciate this a lot. I'm personally wary of what sounds to me like dogmatic statements about, for example, Rigpa. Like if awareness is based in our brains can be damaged in principle, as an example. But I really like the idea of stainless mirror and reminder / pointer toward non-duality. Rigpa is interesting. I need to keep an eye on the time. We got 10 minutes. So, there was this, I wrote about it in Modern Tantric Buddhism. There was a hospice patient I had who was a Dharma teacher who had a long, they had, 45, 50 years of meditation experience. And in that, they were still, they were at the end of life. This person suffered from cancer and had to be on morphine. And they were really conflicted about that. And the morphine was for pain. And I remember, in this article in Tricycle Magazine, in one of the early issues, like maybe within the first 5 issues, about whether or not Buddhists should take morphine for pain at the end of life. And somebody said that, no, it's not a good idea because the mind needs to be completely clear and lucid at the time of death. And when you look at Dharma texts, especially in the tantric tradition around dying in the death process, that is what the tradition states. And so at the same time though, like pain is so intense sometimes that we can do nothing but obsess over the experience of it. And so if we've ever suffered from chronic pain or know people who suffer from chronic pain, it takes over completely in that experience. So anyway, this person at the end of the day decided, because their cancer had actually spread into their spine and manifested in an intensely painful way, that they had to take morphine. And I went to go see them after they had decided, very reluctantly to do this, that they weren't in pain, but they they were depressed. And I was like, we sat together and I asked, how you're doing? They're like, I'm depressed. And I asked why, and they're like, well, now I've been taking morphine, and I, in the vernacular, like I'm screwed. When I die, like I'm not going to have the lucidity, and the effects of the morphine were present, right? The person was kind of like a little bit in and out of it in the moment. And I asked them if they wouldn't mind sitting in meditation for a bit, and we did. And so, we sat in meditation, and then I ended up asking them if they could, if they were able to maintain awareness of all of the thoughts that are arising, and all of the physical sensations that were arising, and all of that. And they were able to respond in great depth, around all of the thoughts, all of the emotions, all of the physical sensations. And, I ended up asking that person, like, where then is your awareness impeded by the morphine? You know, and so and it was really kind of illuminating for them, and it was illuminating for me to be in that experience, with them. That awareness is not, just as you say, Tony, like, it's not in the brain, right? Awareness is not necessarily something that is impeded by substances, necessarily. Now, that being said, like, our ability to focus, right, our ability to concentrate, and all of these things can be affected by substances. But it's interesting to consider that, just like you bring up, about it being, is awareness based in our brain or not? Is awareness in our heart or not? Is awareness something that is, limited by morphine or not? Is something that we need to kind of play with, not by taking morphine, but by coming back to practice and experimenting in this way. Again, not experimenting with morphine. I'm not saying that, but to experiment with coming back to practice time and time and time again, and understanding that awareness is present even in dullness. But how that arises for us, we need to be able to determine through experience ourselves. Before we end, I want to get to Jamandria's question because it's important. What are our responsibilities to ethically witness things that trigger our kleshas? So, well, our responsibilities are to care for ourselves as we practice Dharma, right? And so, and we also need to be realistic. So the reality of the situation is that our kleshas are on fire, every day. And that doesn't make us bad people, and it doesn't make us bad practitioners. It's just the nature of kleshas, right? That's why, we want to be able to experience a freedom, a liberation from kleshas, right? But how we do that is through practice. Now, there will be, for all of us, and again, all of us are different, particular kleshas or combinations of kleshas that are just overpowering, where it's very hard to have even a sense of willpower, in relationship to those. And so it's helpful to be realistic and say that, at this point in time, I don't have, there's not necessarily a lot of skill in engaging specifically with kleshas that are going to just completely, uproot my experience, that I'm going to be kind of consumed in a way that I can't control or can't take responsibility for. And so under those circumstances, we should, out of care for ourselves. And when I say care, I mean, my first teacher pointed out to me that, and I'm going to say this about everyone here, like, everyone here is going to become a Buddha. And as a result, you should care for yourself and love yourself as if you were a Buddha. You should care for your body. You should care for your mind. You should care for your, emotional state, or your psychic state, or your mental state. You should care for your practice. And this is the ethical way to interact with our practices. We don't want to kind of throw ourselves into something that's, re-triggering if there is a dynamic that is triggering for us, that just throws us into the cycle of trauma or reactivity from which there's no easy way out. Right? Where is the skill in that? Why would we would, if we wouldn't wish that on our enemies, why would we, impose that on ourselves? So, my advice on this point is, while the ethics, in around, Buddhism and Dharma practice and Tantric Buddhism, can be looked up and studied, and they should be looked up and studied and reflected on and reflected upon with a nice, healthy, like critical lens. We really should spend a little time contemplating individually for ourselves what it is that is right for us in the moment. And, we may not be these profound spiritual athletes, at an Olympic level right now, but one day we will. And one day we will be able to take on, our most intense kleshas, and they will be self-liberated in the moment. But, until we get to that point, we should be gentle with ourselves and also not judge ourselves for feeling like I can't take the most intense thing on right now. That's okay. So with that said, we're at the end of time, and I really want to thank you all for your practice and for your lovely questions and for again, for remaining critical. It's important to not just absorb this because I'm saying to, or a book says we should, or a tradition says we should. We should practice these instructions and wrestle with them and experience the wisdom from them. And that wisdom, though, is from your experience with them. And so that's going to be wisdom that's experienced through you. And that's where the certainty arises. So anyway, I wish you all my very best. I look forward to all of us arising as Buddhas and spending time in a Buddha pleasure garden where we can turn the wheel of Dharma to liberate all sentient beings. Until then, be well.